From the back alleys of Metro City to the world stage of Street Fighter, two towering figures have loomed large in the legacy of Capcom's brawlers. Born from the ranks of Mad Gear, Hugo and Abigail began as background muscle, massive, intimidating obstacles, standing between the player and victory. Yet over time, both would step out of the shadows, becoming unforgettable in their own right. Hugo, the childlike giant, would grow from a palette-swapped thug into a character shaped by equal parts strength and innocence. Abigail, by contrast, would return decades later, reinvented as a volatile powerhouse, roaring like the engines he so adores. They are both strength incarnate, carved from the DNA of pro wrestling, arcade brawlers, and the mythology of Final Fight. And today, we're diving deep into the worlds of Hugo and Abigail, the wrestling giant, and the Mad Gear monster. Hugo's origins stretch back to the very first Final Fight. At the time, he wasn't called Hugo at all. He was known as Andore, clad in pink and part of a family of towering pro wrestling bruisers who stalked Metro City's back alleys. For most players, the Andores were terrifying obstacles, clones of the same hulking brute, who would charge over and piledrive you into the ground if you weren't careful. Hugo owes much of his look to the legendary Andre the Giant, the Colossus of wrestling, and someone with whom, by coincidence, shares the same birthday. Akira Akiman Yasuda based the design on Andre, but according to designer Akira Nishitani, the name Andore actually comes from a friend's nickname. I've also seen it mentioned that minor inspiration was also taken from the actor and professional weightlifter Lou Ferrigno, though I haven't been able to find an official statement on that. The Andore family themselves would appear across all the 16-bit era side-scrolling Final Fights, fighting alongside a globalized Mad Gear in Final Fight 2, and with the Skull Cross Gang in Final Fight 3. Andore himself would appear in the arcade fighting game Final Fight Revenge, issuing a challenge to Metro City's mayor, Mike Hagar, to fight in the wrestling ring, though his message never reaches its intended audience. He would also appear in the much maligned 3D brawler Final Fight Streetwise. It would be the pink-clad Andore from the original Final Fight that would develop a distinct character following the collapse of the Mad Gear gang, and became who we now call Hugo. He can be seen looming in the background of several Street Fighter Alpha stages, but his story in Street Fighter would truly begin, in terms of the in-universe timeline, in Ultra Street Fighter 4. Here, Hugo is portrayed as the gentle giant, terrifying in stature, but almost childlike in spirit. Slow and lumbering, but with devastating moves that can soon drain an opponent's health bar. In his story, ex-Mad Gear gang members have tracked him down, eager for a fight. Rather than the raging giant they were expecting, however, they find Hugo homesick and guzzling down a can of German potatoes. Hugo having originally came from somewhere in Germany before he was 20 years old. While crying and craving his mother's own potatoes, memories of his childhood surface. In particular, one where his mother affectionately told him to grow big like a potato. The ex-Mad Gear thugs would interrupt his reminiscing, knocking the can from Hugo's hand. This would cause the giant to fly into a blind rage, leaving destruction in his wake, and crying out to his mama that he will become the Big Potato before entering the World Fighting Tournament hosted by SIN. In Hugo's ending, he is approached by Poison, who is searching for new talent to expand her wrestling organization. By the way, I cover her full story, as well as many other Final Fight characters and games, in other videos on the channel. Be sure to check those out after this. Poison remarks that Hugo has grown stronger since their last encounter, and asks if he'd like to join her. At first, Hugo refuses. He won't take orders from anyone anymore. But Poison quickly clarifies. They'd be partners, and with her guidance, she could make him a superstar. She adds that while Hugo is strong, he also has the smarts of a potato. The mention of the word potato stirs up memories of his childhood, and Hugo falls into fault. Believing she's been rejected, Poison moves to leave, only for Hugo to suddenly stop her, looming over her with his massive frame. He demands to know if she truly thinks he's a potato. Before she can give a complete response, Hugo hoists her high into the air and declares that she too can become a potato. Together, they'll be number one. Their journey would continue in Street Fighter III Second Impact. Having partnered with Poison, who works as his flamboyant and cunning manager, Hugo enters the tournament not to conquer the world, but to form the ultimate professional wrestling tag team. Depending on certain conditions met in his arcade run, Hugo can have various characters become his tag team partner in his ending. Those being Gil, Elena, Necro, or even the wandering warrior himself, Ryu. In Third Strike, Hugo and Poison are still out in the world seeking more fighters to join their huge wrestling federation. With Hugo having returned to a solo career in wrestling and dominating his opponents in the ring, tough fighters are needed in order that he continues to have people to fight with. It's in this game we also see Hugo and Alex's recreation of the famous Andre the Giant vs Hulk Hogan staredown at WrestleMania 3. In his ending, Hugo, Poison, and the other fighters he has defeated and drafted into their federation interrupt another wrestling event. Apparently, over 50 warriors have already challenged Hugo and lost, including Ken and Ryu, who seems to believe this experience might be a good test of their skills. As an interesting side note, Hugo was initially planned for Street Fighter III New Generation, the first in the trilogy of Street Fighter III games. However, he was not ready for release, and so was pushed back to Second Impact Giant Attack, so named for having two large characters, Hugo and Urien, join the roster. Character data for Hugo is, however, buried deep inside the code of New Generation, and people have even shown this beta version in action. Hugo has not returned to the roster since Ultra Street Fighter IV, though he has made cameos. First in Street Fighter V within Poison's story mode, where the pair have seemingly had a falling out. Poison returns to Metro City to find a replacement for Hugo, only for the Man Mountain to eventually come back to her, seemingly filled with regret. Hugo also appears in her arcade ending, where Poison has him undergoing an intense training regime. He also appears in Street Fighter VI's World Tour mode, where the Giant can be seen on one of the many billboards of Metro City. Will Hugo ever return to the roster, standing tall once again, even above Zangief? Only time will tell. But where Hugo sought purpose in the world of wrestling, another Mad Gear Giant chose a very different path. Hailing from Canada, though he claimed to be from Holland, Abigail's path begins in Final Fight. Introduced as one of the final bosses in the game, with his painted face, massive frame, and unique moveset, Abigail stood apart from the Andore clan, even if his sprite was, under the hood, a modified Andore. He was not subtle. He was a wall, a monstrous brute who stood between the heroes and Mad Gear's leadership. After Mad Gear's fall, he would later appear in the background of the Metro City stage in Street Fighter Alpha 2, and then nothing. For decades, Abigail vanished into obscurity, a giant remembered only by the most dedicated fans of Metro City. That was until Season 3 of Street Fighter V. Abigail returned, bigger and louder than ever, reinvented as a playable fighter, obsessed about cars, engines, and horsepower. Given to volcanic tantrums, he was transformed into a cartoonish juggernaut of rage and excess. Lumbering and powerful, much like Hugo before him, but more a powerhouse brawler than grappler. A monster truck of a man who bulldozed the opposition and utilized armored attacks. Now the owner of an auto shop called Abigail's Scrap Metal, he, alongside other ex-Mad Gear members Roxy, Jay, and Axel, seek to leave their days of crime behind. In spite of his size, Abigail is more comedic than menacing. In his story mode, he stands in the streets of New York City, making motor noises while searching for his missing car, inadvertently insulting and getting into fights with passing street fighters. Yes, it's pretty ridiculous. Eventually, Roxy, Axel, and Jay return from a shopping trip. It turns out Abigail had forgotten that he'd let them borrow his car. He also makes appearances in other characters' stories, generally getting harassed and having his face insulted. Cody attacks him for illegally parking his vehicle. Lucia attacks him as she believes he may still be working with Mad Gear to undermine Mayor Cody. And Poison also attacks him to test his fighting abilities, hoping he might be a good replacement for Hugo and fight in her wrestling federation. But Abigail has truly turned over a new leaf. His business is legitimate and booming. How Belger is still alive, though, is anyone's guess. But success brings new pressures, and Abigail still struggles to keep the volcanic rage beneath his engine-roaring exterior under control. Like Hugo, however, Abigail has not appeared in the roster of Street Fighter VI, though his scrapyard and image are both present in the Bay Area of Metro City. Whether he makes a more substantive appearance remains to be seen. With Hugo and Abigail both having stepped away from the main roster, what remains is the legacy of two very different giants. Two paths carved from the same Mad Gear roots. Hugo and Abigail both began as Mad Gear Muscle, but their second lives in Street Fighter reveal two very different interpretations of the giant archetype. Hugo is the gentle giant, a figure of comedy, yes, but also one of longing. His strength is immense, yet his spirit is childlike, often fragile, fighting not for destruction, but for recognition and the family he left behind in Germany. Abigail, by contrast, struggles with the rage within. Made more comedic, perhaps even than Hugo, his anger seems to be kept in check by those former Mad Gear members who joined him in creating a legitimate business, though even they can become victims of his barely contained fury. And yet, for all their differences, both giants remain forever tied to Metro City's legacy. In the world of Street Fighter, where warriors may harness ki, psycho power, and the dark intent, the giants of Metro City remain something simpler. They are strength incarnate, undeniable, and immovable. Their paths remind us of Final Fight's enduring legacy, and how even the most disposable of enemies can rise to become legends. As Street Fighter VI continues to expand its world, one can only wonder, will the giants walk again? If you like this video, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who loves Final Fight or Street Fighter. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, check out the abyss that is my Patreon. It helps me keep making these deep dives, expanding into other games, and gives you access to bonus content along the way. Thanks again for watching. Keep on being excellent to yourselves and one another, and I'll see you soon.